Hi everyone. We've spent the first part of this course learning about Excel, and we're just about to dive into Access. And that brings up the question, how do we know when to choose between these two very powerful tools? Now both programs, well, they look alike. They both store data, and you enter the data into grids of cells, so understandably there is some confusion. But to choose between the two, we need to answer a few simple questions about how we organize that data and how much data we want to store. Ultimately, answering those questions correctly can save us a lot of time. So let's dig into which to choose and when, asking the right questions to select the right program, and ultimately the goal of this lecture is to learn to choose the right program and to determine whether to use a relational or a flat data structure, and we'll get into that in the next few slides. Now, in order to ask the right questions to select the right program, well, we should have a little puzzled look right now. We're going to have to take a step back to understand some of the basic terms. One of the first questions we'll have to ask ourselves is, do you need to organize your data into a relational data structure or a flat data structure? And yes, those are geek terms, and we're not going to let that intimidate us. And we'll spend the next few slides and review the different types of data structures and how to choose between them. What's meant by a relational data structure, well, that divides your information into logical pieces and places pieces in separate tables. For example, if we had a sales database, they typically put information about customers, their names, addresses, and other key facts in one table, and the information about what those customers buy into another table. Organizing your data in this way can be quite powerful. One of the greatest advantages of a relational structure is that, well, now you're separating your tables, and that makes it easier to manage, because each table holds just a piece of your overall information. And now that each table only contains parts of our information, well, that helps us keep it more accurate. And we can also prevent users from entering data into the wrong table. And we'll see some of this in our SAM lessons as we learn about forms and reports. Now, the other type of structure that we talk about is a flat structure. And this simply keeps all of your data together. A flat data structure is a simple list. And a good example of that is like a grocery list or a list of friends and relatives. Some advantages of a flat structure, well, they're easy to create. They're easy to maintain, as long as you don't have too much information. And that's what we've been doing in Excel. We've been creating simple lists. And we know those are easy to create and to manipulate. Now, each table in a relational structure, that's also flat. The only real difference between the types of structures is that with flat files, you don't need to relate the data in one list to the data in another. The list is useful by itself. So how can we tell if we need this relational structure? Well, if actions are repeated or data is repeated, that's a great tip-off. And here we have an example where we have a customer that places an order on July 8th and another order on July 10th. One customer and many actions. So if we have repeating data, well, you don't need to repeat it. You can put that data into its own table and create a relationship to it. Doing so can save you a lot of time and effort because you don't have to re-enter the same information over and over again. A second consideration is, do you want to track actions or events? For example, do you want to track sales or customer complaints? Anytime you want to track an action, a relational data structure usually works best. Now, we want to consider more than just the way we store the data when choosing between the two. We want to take a look at the way that we use the data. Now, if our focus is more on managing and storage, then Access is probably the one to choose. But if we want to analyze the data, well, in the first part of this course, we learned just how powerful an analysis tool Excel is, and that might be the better choice. Another question we want to answer is, how much data do we have? For example, if our Excel sheet gets too large, trust me, they get hard to use. So if we have a lot of information, Access is probably the better choice. Another consideration is the type of data. Is it numeric or is it text? Access can store large amounts of text, up to 2 gigabytes in a single database, while we know Excel is designed to store numbers and perform sophisticated calculations on them. Now, Access didn't get its name by accident. Access provides greater access to the data. So if you have users, they might have a hard time entering data into grids of cells. And as we'll learn about in Access, we can create all sorts of great data entry forms that make that job easier. Now, in the next few weeks, we'll also be learning about creating reports. And with Access, we can create all sorts of reports and run them at any time. Now, last week we learned about how we can use Excel with multiple contributors, but Access was built for that very problem of having multiple people working on the data at the same time. Another consideration is because we store information in individual tables in Access, when we have to correct that information, we only need to correct it in that one place, in that one table. With Excel, we'd have to go through and correct each instance of that data as it appears in that flat list. Now, turning our attention to Excel and when to select that, in week 4 we learned about pivot reports and pivot tables, and we know just how powerful a tool that is to be able to manipulate and analyze data. And earlier in week 3, we learned of all the power of creating visuals with charts and data bars, and Excel is fantastic for that. One last consideration is that, well, not everybody has Access, so we need to know that before we make a selection between the two tools. With all this new information, we should all be a little more confident about when to select one tool over the other. So in the discussion forum this week, I have some follow-up questions for everybody, and I look forward to your responses. Thank you all.